What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 164. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. A lot to talk about on today's show. Reporting from Bob Woodward about Mark Milley has Americans calling for the general to resign, and some calling him a traitor, although others are calling him a hero. So I'll be discussing all that. John Durham, who's investigating the origins of Russiagate, has a new indictment against Mark Sussmann, who's a Clinton DNC lawyer. He lied to the FBI in fabricating a fake Russiagate hoax. And then I have updates on the Kabul airstrike that killed 10 civilians, including 7 children. So, a lot of important stuff to talk about on today's show. I need you all to share the show. It's hosted at the Libertarian Institute. I have links to everywhere else you can find the show there at the YouTube video embedded there, so if you want to watch the video you can. And of course, anything I write ends up at the institute, so libertarianinstitute.org/Kyle for all my work. Also want to update you on a couple other things going on at the institute, and that is the new YouTube channel that we have, where Scott and Pete are hosting a new show, and we're posting clips from the other Libertarian Institute shows, including this show, as well as Free Man Beyond the Wall, Scott Horton Show, Liberty Weekly, Don't Tread on Anyone, and Year Zero. So that's definitely something we're checking out and subscribing to. We put the show on YouTube, but we also run accounts on Rumble and Odyssey if you like subscribing to the video version. Of course, wherever you're listening, please give it a thumbs up, rating, and review, whatever you can to encourage other people to listen to the show. Really working on growing it, and that starts with our listeners. And then another thing that we do is have our Facebook, MeWe, and Twitter accounts where we post clips from the show. Donate to the show at Patreon and Subscribestar, and also we have the information for the crypto in the show notes pages. You can also support the show by doing your CBD shopping at Paloma Verde. PalomaVerdeCBD.com is the URL. The promo code is PEACE, and that gets you 25% off. They have a great selection of products at Paloma Verde. They have topicals, which I really like. I use their sports cream most days. It works very fast. It lasts a long time. Don't have like the icy hot temperature changes that you have to deal with. Don't have the old man Bengay smell that you have to deal with. Just a nice, relaxing, refreshing menthol smell that comes with that. But they also have other products like their tinctures, soft gels, gummies. So if you got a little anxiety, maybe find some relief with some of those products. They also have stuff for your dog. All their products have lab tested results and also education information on how best to use your CBD products. So do your shopping at PalomaVerdeCBD.com. Use the promo code PEACE. That gets you a discount. That helps the show. All right, now let's get into it. So the first article is Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, is reported by Bob Woodward and Robert Costa in their new book. I think it's titled Peril. And by the way, this is out to be sold. So, of course, this is marketing for the book, and definitely something to keep in mind. And also, historically, Bob Woodward does have access to high-ranking government officials. However, high-ranking government officials say self-serving things, and so sometimes his stories, while interesting, may not be entirely truthful, or just from one perspective. And just to keep in mind that whoever told Bob Woodward this story had a political motive for doing so. But the reaction to this story, including from Mark Milley himself, doesn't suggest to me that this is entirely untrue, and definitely worth breaking down and examining. And so what Woodward and Costa write is that Milley talked to the highest ranking Chinese general, which he is like the highest ranking U.S. military officer, and as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a consultant to the president on military orders. And that's Li Zhaoqing is the Chinese general he talked to. And it's reported that it happened just before and after the 2020 election, which just before could mean a month or a week or a day, but I'm guessing it's probably in the weeks category, so probably late October, mid-November, he's making calls to this Chinese general. And it's being portrayed as, because Trump was being so reckless, Milley called these generals to say that he would alert China if the U.S. was going to like come up with any. Trump was planning to attack China, and I guess he never actually made that alert, and so maybe his fear that Trump was going to attack China was a little bit overblown. It's not exactly clear, and again, the whole book isn't out yet. That this is all the details to this and exactly how it happened, but the reaction to this story has gotten him condemned from a lot of people, and not just Fox News. Even Alexander Vindman, who we talked about on this show as being kind of a rat and not really somebody to be trusted, but definitely a deep state actor, and he criticized Milley for this. And Milley is generally liked by the U.S. establishment, and so from inside the military, this is not me inside the military, but the at least retired military community. This has drawn some condemnation, and again, of course, Republicans, I guess probably both out of loyalty to Trump and just now scoring political points against this general that seems to be favorable and agreeable towards Biden, as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. There definitely calls for him to resign and calling him a traitor. Now, there are members of the establishment, including this article that I have from The Atlantic. I don't know if this article goes as far as to call him a hero, but there are people calling him a hero and saying that, this was a very brave thing to do when you have a president as reckless as Trump. And in a way, it's kind of playing on the American respect that we have for our military, that, often if you look at like Congress, the Supreme Court, the presidency, and the military is the one with like the most credibility and respect from the American people. And so in a way, I think they're kind of playing on that and playing up the whole idea that, we could have congressmen who are, or not, excuse me, not congressmen, excuse me, military officers that are more capable than the president and, should override the president from time to time. And I think that's the concern here because, my instinct is always pro peace, and even over like constitutional frameworks and stuff like that. Now, I think 99% of the time, if we went by the Constitution, that would make America, less likely to go to war, and we probably wouldn't have gotten involved in almost any of the wars that America has gotten into. However, if there was some scenario where like Congress was trying to keep the country at war and the president was trying to bring the troops home, I support the president's executive war authorities on that every single time, no doubt in my mind whatsoever. So, I mean, that's kind of just my position on it, to be absolutely clear, because I am going to, give my commentary and say that I don't think that Milley did the right thing here, even though it seems that this is a case where he was looking to ease down tensions between the U.S. and China. And that is a reason that I think connections between U.S. and governments like Iran or Russia or China at different levels is important. However, if Milley was really worried that Trump was so unhinged that he was going to carry out this preemptive attack against China, he really needs to tell the American people that and come out publicly, resign, and in that way China will know at least the situation from Milley's perspective, and also then get other perspectives too. The Trump himself will be able to respond to this, because maybe in a way, if Trump, because he obviously didn't attack China here, this could almost have been an inflationary issue long term between the U.S. and China. If you have General Mark Milley calling and saying, "Oh, at any time Trump could attack," that that could really have cause China to take different policy actions in the future, maybe more aggressive and hostile against the U.S. even. And so I just think that's something really important to consider, that while in the short term and maybe in that sense, if again Trump was about to do this would have been a way to maybe calm down tensions and was a good thing. But at the same time, if Milley was just inflating the threat that Trump presented, that could actually be an increase of tensions between the U.S. and China. But from my perspective, I think this is the least important of the two stories. The more important one, Ray McGovern does a great job of breaking down in his new article for antiwar.com. Please check it out. It's on the page today. Old soldier Mark Milley should fade away. And this is about the other thing that Mark Milley did, which I believe the date on this is January 8th. He called in all the military commanders one by one. And it's not exactly clear to me what all the military commanders means. Was this just like, the head of CENTCOM, the head of STRATCOM, the head of NORTHCOM, SOUTHCOM, or maybe even lower ranking military personnel, just basically all the generals. But anyways, he called them in one by one to ensure them that they would involve him in the nuclear chain of command. Now, the reason this is important is that as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and as the highest ranking military member in the United States, it is actually not his role to be involved in that chain of command. And this is explained in the Ray McGovern article by Colonel Douglas McGregor, who I believe was in the administration at this time, saying that nuclear chain of command runs from POTUS to Secretary of Defense. So at the time that would have been Christopher Miller. Now it would be Lloyd Austin. And then to Strategic Command, which is the ones who actually hold the nukes. He says, obviously, there are others that POTUS can consult, but as far as orders are concerned, what above is accurate. POTUS would also have to grant authority for any tactical weapon at sea or in the air. Again, Milley is the senior military advisor to POTUS. He can be consulted, but there is nothing in law that requires his participation. Presumably, that is why he insisted that he be involved. And so this, is insubordination from Mark Milley, and it's inserting himself within the nuclear chain of command. And again, this does seem to be a case that if you just kind of read it on face value, it's very easy to just conclude that, hey, Mark Milley may have done a good thing here because he put another layer between a president and using nuclear weapons by kind of usurping the president's power to use nuclear weapons. Now, the concern is what does this actually mean? If the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff now has, authority over nuclear weapons, can he then use them, aggressively if he feels like the president either is incompetent or not going to? Which, I'm not saying that is Joe Biden's current mental state right now, but let's say since months from now, the guy hasn't spoken in public in 3 months, and everybody's doing this alarmism and fear-mongering about China, or let's say Russia, Iran, or North Korea, or, any other country that we put on the enemy list. And could Mark Milley then, essentially stick himself into the chain of command somewhere and then authorize an attack? And while that isn't something that, we necessarily know is the case right now, as Ray McGovern points out, and he, was involved in the CIA, he briefed the older President Bush, when he was vice president. So he knows how this works. And he says, now Putin and Xi have concrete evidence that this kind of insubordination extends to potential nuclear conflict and extends to the very top of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And Mark Milley is seen as a good guy for what he did. But, Putin and Xi, of course, have no guarantee that the current situation isn't going to, usher in who knows who Mark Milley's replacement is, or again, what Mark Milley is going to judge to be the military situation, and in fact could feel like the president isn't carrying out enough military action. Also, we've seen other times in the past where the U.S. has, or where the military seems to have stuck itself within the chain of command and do things to, circumvent diplomacy trying to be negotiated by the president, such as in 2015 when the Obama administration was trying to work out a deal with Russia, working together against jihadists in Syria. Suddenly, the U.S. Air Force ends up blowing up a Syrian military position and scuttling that whole deal. We could see these kind of things happen. The more that our military stits themselves in this chain of command, the less that we have civilian control over our military, which is extremely important. And again, there are things that Mark Milley could have done here that would have been appropriate, including resigning and telling the American people what the hell was going on, not leaving us to discover 8 months later from a Bob Woodward book in a teaser to try to sell it. If you're really concerned that that was going to happen, the American people need to know. All right, let's move on and talk about Russiagate. Of course, this is one of those stories that I have been covering on the old show Foreign Policy Focus and now Conflicts of Interest for years on end. And, one of the claims that came out during Russiagate that was initially and for years really difficult to debunk was this Alpha Bank connection to the Trump organization. And the reason it was kind of difficult to debunk is because there wasn't anything to it. And, if somebody just accuses some random thing of happening and there's no evidence for it, there may be no evidence against it either because it's completely fake. And so that was the case here. This was actually before the 2016 election, late October. This lawyer who works for Perkins Coie, Mark Sussmann, it got the meeting September 19th with FBI General Counsel to provide with data files that was going to prove the alleged collusion between Alpha Bank and the Trump organization. And so at that meeting, Sussmann presented himself as I guess a non-biased actor, and the Perkins Coie is a major representing firm of the DNC and the Clintons. And so, this guy was a part of the Clinton campaign and, kind of knew that the game here was try to create a story in the media where Trump would look bad. This was opposition. This was, just mudslinging smear campaign stuff. But this, really ballooned. And as the whole Russiagate narrative unfolded, because this was one thing where, there wasn't any evidence really to debunk a fake thing that was completely invented. And so it was repeated well into 2019, even though the FBI did know it was untrue in February of 2019. So then we have Hillary Clinton put out this tweet just before the 2016 election saying computer scientists have apparently uncovered a covert server linking the Trump organization to a Russian-based bank. And I believe she's linking, or this is a statement from Jade Sullivan that she's, has photographed here. And that statement talks about the Slate article that I'll get into in a second that reported this, this story. And so the Clinton administration is kind of presenting like there was an independent media outlet found this out, and we're now finding it out too. Again, this is the way it's being presented, although, they're not exactly outright saying that. So there could be deniability or something like that there. Jade Sullivan, it's important to remember, is the current national security advisor to Joe Biden. And this scheme is what Dick Cheney did with Judith Miller to lie the Americans into the war in Iraq with WMDs. So, again, Sussmann is now indicted. This is from the John Durham probe that's looking into the origins of Russiagate. I thought from the very beginning it would be a disappointment, and it has been. That being said, that this does seem to be significant, at least to this one lie that Russiagate produced. This indictment was approved by the Attorney General Merrick Garland, who is a Joe Biden appointee. So while the Sussmann team responded that this was political, it doesn't seem to be all that political. Now, The actual lie comes from him not saying how involved he was, with the Clinton campaign, and that this was essentially a story that the Clinton team was trying to manufacture, and that way he used the FBI and used FBI resources. Although that's not what he's being charged for. What he's being charged for, is the lie of not misleading the FBI, saying that he wasn't involved here. All right, so there's a great Glenn Greenwald article out on his Substack titled "The Indictment of Hillary Clinton's Lawyer is an Indictment of the Russiagate Wing of the U.S. Media," and I'm going to be breaking this down to really explain how nefarious this whole thing was. And so he points out at the beginning that this is the second thing to come from the Durham investigation. The first was the guilty plea from FBI agent Kevin Kleinsmith, and this was super nefarious as well, where Carter Page was a CIA asset, and he specifically removed that from the documents that he gave to the FISA court and presented it to the FISA court that Carter Page had no contact with the CIA and was directly said that he wasn't an asset, which he was. And so that, that's an important thing to remember of the Durham investigation. All right, so again, you have Mark Sussmann, who is a lawyer at Perkins. It's Coy. I thought it was Cole. And this organization represents the DNC and the Clinton Foundation. He takes information with a appointment that he gets with the FBI and gives the FBI this information. Then he goes to Slate and meets with this guy, this reporter, Franklin Ford, and he has Franklin run this story as well. And so now the Slate article is running it as like an FBI is investigating this story, this story, but it's just this one guy who's manufacturing it. And then you have it repeated by the Clinton campaign in public, and this is all leading people to believe that Donald Trump is carrying out these secret communications with the Russian Alphabet server. Now, what happened, and it was quickly debunked, and the FBI actually knew in February of 2017 that there were no actual links. And I guess what had happened is that some Trump hotel was using some organization to send out their offer for Trump hotel, 25% off, stay 7 nights for $199 a night, or whatever email that you get in your inbox, and that agency was somehow linked to Alphabet. This was completely a non-issue at all. There were no secret communications, and there were no links at all. And that, this was known by the FBI in February 2017. And you would think that this would have been important information for the FBI to give the American people, since this was one of the key claims suggesting by a lot of people in the U.S. mainstream media and particularly Democratic politicians that Donald Trump was actually an agent of a foreign power, that they could have come out and told the American people that there are no links here and there's no reason to think this was happening. But that unfortunately did not happen, and it wasn't until 2019, December of 2019, that the American people actually got officially from our government that this was the case. So I think that's a lot of the actual information here of how the Clinton campaign planted the story and tried to spin it up. Of course, the really problematic thing is it lasted for years and was this key basis that was used to demonize Russia to the American public time and time again. And just really problematic what happened here. It's really disgusting. It's an indictment not only of course, Slate and Fuhrer and the FBI and Clinton and the DNC, and of course a literal indictment of Mark Sussmann, but also just of the media as a whole, who reported this for so long, and now that this is being reported, has no interest of talking about it at all. And it's an extremely important story. Again, this is understanding the same thing that happened with Judith Miller and Dick Cheney, where, they were giving her information, she was publishing it, and then the Bush administration was saying, like, look, it was published in the Washington Post, as, giving it extra credibility, and the American people believe that there's a different source that these publications have, and that's not the case. It's the same source, and it's being fabricated by one person. And while, Franklin, unfortunately, will not be, fired and cast out of journalism forever for this, crime that he helped to, fake crime that he helped to sell the American people, but has actually been promoted and now works at the Atlantic. So that's the main part of it. Now, a couple things that Glenn Greenwald points out at the end of his article that I think are important too. He says other issues. The FBI should have known that Sussmann was a political op and never taken that seriously. Without the FBI looking into this, it doesn't give Slate as much credibility to run the story. And then, of course, why did the FBI not say anything? And also, Natasha Bertrand, who is about the worst Russiagator we've had in this whole thing, and member of the media who has constantly reported these fake stories to the American people, and refused to admit that she's lied to us the entire time. She reported in March 2017, which is a month after we knew that the FBI knew that this story was fake. And so, this is a month after everybody in the FBI knows that this is fake. She's reporting that the FBI is still seriously looking into it. So, that's another real issue. And why was she reporting that? That's something that we should get to the bottom of. Now, it's very telling that the mainstream media spent the entire weekend talking about these nothing protests, and really leading up to the entire week, these nothing protests in DC of some people demanding that protesters are people who are January 6th who are alleged of committing various crimes. Whether or not they commit those crimes is still in question. Some of them are still being held in solitary confinement in these brutal, horrific conditions. And so there are people there saying that they're political prisoners being let out of jail. However, only about 5 people showed up. One of the main people that seemed to be maybe an actual protester was, this kid in a coonskin cap holding an American flag. There's also this situation where there's an armed man on the scene, but that, of course, turned out to be some kind of law enforcement. He had a badge and was undercover. They let him go with his gun. There were reports that he may have been charged, but I'm not sure how serious that is. It's pretty clear from all the photos that I've seen that there was definitely more media at this event and probably more counter protesters than actual protesters. And so everybody's all concerned about, the integrity of our elections and election interference, and they're focusing on this nothing event when here we have an indictment that, again, was backed by Biden's Attorney General, Merrick Garland, that's showing how they tried to manipulate an election and then lied to the American people about it for 4 years afterwards. And that should certainly deserve more media attention than it's getting. Now on to more news about Afghanistan, and as I said, updates at the beginning. This from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. Pentagon admits Kabul drone strike killed 10 civilians, including 7 children. And the subhead is the military previously claimed it targeted ISIS-K. Dave writes, on Friday, the head of U.S. Central Command, CENTCOM, admitted that the August 29th drone strike in Kabul killed 10 civilians, including 7 children, and did not kill any ISIS-K members. As many as 10 civilians and up to 7 children were tragically killed in the strike. Moreover, we now assess that it is unlikely that the vehicle and those who died were associated with ISIS-K, said CENTCOM Commander General Frank McKenzie. Now, of course, a very important part of this is we know that they were not associated by the great reporting that the New York Times did on the ground, as well as some by the Washington Post. And so, the Pentagon is still trying to hedge it a little bit. I guess that way they're diehard supporters who believe that the Pentagon has mythical powers to only kill bad guys can assume that, one of these guys definitely was somehow associated with ISIS-K or something like that. Initially, the Pentagon claimed the strike killed an ISIS-K member and prevented an imminent attack on the Kabul airport. General Mark Milley described the strike as righteous, and the White House said it was successful. But the investigation from the New York Times found the bombing targeted 43-year-old Zamari Ahmadi, an aid worker employed by a U.S. NGO, and killed 9 members of his family. This is further quotes from McKenzie. The strike was taken in the earnest belief that it would prevent an imminent threat to our forces and the evacuees at the airport, but it was a mistake, and I must offer my sincere apologies. He added, fully responsible for this strike and its tragic outcome. Now, you would think that if you are fully responsible for the murder of 7 children and 3 adults, 10 people in total, that you would probably spend the rest of your life in prison. However, this guy didn't even offer up his resignation. And so I'm not, you could say that you're accepting full responsibility, but that's just complete bullshit and a lie. And it is even a greater offense to pretend that you're accepting responsibility when you're not. And again, a sincere apology means absolutely nothing when you slaughter 10 members of a family. This is continuing from David DeCamp's story. In 2015, documents leaked by whistleblower Daniel Hale, who was recently sentenced to 45 months in prison, revealed that during a 5-month period between 2012 and 2013, 90% of the people killed by U.S. drones were civilians. And so while Mark Milley and the U.S. want to pretend that this was just some one-off tragic event that happened, no, this has consistently been what the U.S. drone war has been this entire time. We've been carrying out for 20 years in Afghanistan. And the only thing different, the only thing unique about this strike was that somebody actually bothered to do good reporting on it. And I really do credit the New York Times for putting that out. I'm not trying to downplay that and be too angry at the U.S. mainstream media, but so many of these strikes just happen in rural Afghanistan. They claim they killed terrorists, and that's all the reporting that happens. That's all they do. They never critically report on it, and most of them go completely unreported on. But if they do, the reporting consists of repeating whatever CENTCOM, AFRICOM, or whatever military general Pentagon spokesperson has said. So rarely do they get reported on. And if somebody actually does travel to the site of the strike, which occasionally happens in Afghanistan or in Somalia or Syria or Yemen, so many times that reporter will find that no, it wasn't Al-Shabaab, it wasn't AQAP, no, it wasn't ISIS-K that was killed. It was innocent people, just children, people going to a wedding, a funeral, going shopping, coming home from work, whatever it may be. And, these in a way I want to call them tragedies, but they're not. These war crimes happen time and time again, and there has been zero accountability. One of the amazing legacies of the U.S. war on terrorism is that, the whistleblowers, Chelsea Manning, Daniel Hale, and John Kiriakou have spent time in prison for exposing the torture program, the drone programs, and war crimes committed by U.S. soldiers, and none of the war criminals have spent a day in prison. It's unbelievably frustrating and angering. I do have a article here up from some statements of the family that was reported by Al Jazeera. I definitely recommend checking out this one. It's running today at antiwar.com, titled Apology Not Enough. Says survivors of U.S. drone strike in Kabul. This is absolutely the case. The victims are demanding accountability, compensation, and relocation, which are all perfectly acceptable things and what the U.S. should be doing. There are several members of this family that lost 10 loved ones in this attack. And again, devastating. Probably an entire generation of this family was wiped out by this airstrike, if you don't really want to think of the horror of what the U.S. did here. And so there's not going to be any accountability. I think there's a possibility that the U.S. does go ahead and pay out condolence payments to this family and does relocate them to another country. However, those are, really the minor issues, because without accountability, without people going to jail, these attacks are going to continue to happen. And that's the real tragedy here, is that this is nowhere near over. The U.S. has continued to assert, Joe Biden has made it very clear that he is not ending the war against ISIS-K in Afghanistan, that he is going to continue the drone war there, that he wants to maintain these over-horizon capabilities. So drone strikes and raids carried out in Afghanistan, where we're going to identify people, just like we did with this strike. They say they watched this guy drive around for 8 hours and couldn't figure that he worked for a U.S. based company. How was that the case? You pretend like you're this massive global empire that could figure anything out anywhere on the face of the planet, and you have a guy driving around Kabul, the capital city of a country the U.S. occupied for 20 years, and he's working for a company based in California, and you blew him up because he loaded water tanks into the back of his car. It's absolutely inexcusable, and if there's not major accountability and overhaul, it's going to happen time and time again, and it probably already has happened somewhere on earth since this happened. All right, a couple other stories in Afghanistan. One, the Islamic State has claimed credibility or responsibility for an attack in eastern Afghanistan. It happened in Jalalabad, which is the capital of the Nangarhar province, where ISIS-K has mainly operated in Afghanistan over the past half a decade or so. They say that they killed or injured 35 members of the Taliban militia. I'm not exactly sure who that is, and hell, it could have even been regular people or something like that. Just, some Afghans with guns that are more, prefer the Taliban to ISIS-K or whatever, that, they're just claiming that they're members of the Taliban. The Taliban didn't say anything about it, and a source had told Reuters that 3 people were killed. But, it's very interesting that any minor crime by the Taliban, which I'm not saying shouldn't be reported on at all, but when you look and pay attention to the media, there's a very clear narrative that the media is trying to establish that the Taliban are acting violently and that they're dangerous, which isn't necessarily untrue, but at the same time, they're not talking about the fact that it seems that since August 29th, the U.S. has murdered more Afghan children than the U.S. has. So, why isn't that being discussed? Why aren't we trying to have accountability there? Why aren't we making a big deal of this ISIS-K attack? It seems that, there's just a narrative of trying to demonize the Taliban. There's another interesting story that Dave DeCamp has wrote up at antiwar.com. And this one, just like the Woodward stuff, the source is questionable, is Zalmay Khalilzad, who has worked both for Trump and Biden as the ambassador to Afghanistan, who worked out and negotiated the deal with the Taliban in Qatar. And so, maybe he is trying to spin this a little bit so he doesn't look as bad. But I think there are some things that we know happened, in the Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan, that lead me to believe that this story is probably more or less accurate. And Khalilzad says that he told the Financial Times, that's where this is reported, that the former Afghan president, Ashraf Ghani, decided to flee Afghanistan at the last minute, which ruined a deal with the Taliban. Under the deal, the Taliban would not have entered Kabul until they negotiated a political transition with Ghani, but he unexpectedly fled on August 15th, and created a security vacuum that prompted the Taliban to march into the city. Khalilzad said, even at the end, we had an agreement with the Talibs for them not to enter Kabul. And then once Ghani fled, it basically caused the collapse of the Afghan government, and then that created the power vacuum, and the Taliban decided to enter. Now, I guess it's fair to say that maybe the Taliban shouldn't have entered once the power vacuum happened anyways, because there wasn't, at least as far as I could tell, widespread looting going on. However, if the Taliban hadn't entered, who knows, maybe looting could have started. So this is just like a hypothetical thing, but that is something that the Taliban have gotten a lot of criticism for. And actually, I think it was the U.S. bad dictator of Afghanistan, Ghani, who kind of caused the Taliban to end up in Kabul so early. He didn't say, but it has been reported that Ghani was basically stealing a bunch of money and that's why he left. And, a lot of people have try to speculate as to what Ghani's motives are. I think this guy may just be a crook and was just looking out for number one and saw an opportunity to take off with some suitcases full of money before he, risked being strung up by the Taliban waiting there any longer, and took the opportunity to do so. All right, now a few stories on Saudi Arabia's war in Yemen, which of course is an absolute nightmare. And we're almost 10 months into 2021, a year where the UN predicted that 400,000 Yemeni children would starve to death because of this war, and nothing has been done to improve the condition of the people of Yemen. And in fact, has gotten worse as the war has raged on. While Biden came into office pledging to end offensive support for Saudi Arabia's war in Yemen, I quickly identified this as being mindless, just propaganda, right? He was just saying something that he wanted to sound good. He had no actual interest at all in overhauling the U.S. relationship with Saudi Arabia, hence why he said that Mohammed bin Salman was involved in killing the Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi, but then decided not to sanction the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia and the country's de facto ruler. Likewise, he's willing to say that we'll end offensive support for Saudi Arabia's war in Yemen, but will continue to defensively support Saudi Arabia. That's essentially just saying that we're going to support Saudi Arabia in the same way Trump did, but we're going to call it defensive. And that's exactly what's happened. The State Department has now approved its first military contract with Saudi Arabia. This is a $500 million maintenance deal for Saudi Arabia's military helicopter fleet. And so this is going to allow them to wage and continue the war in Yemen. And again, we're just aiding the suffering and starvation of hundreds of thousands of Yemeni children. I honestly don't know how many Yemeni kids. I know Yemeni kids are starving to death. The video photographic evidence is there. If it's hundreds of thousands, I mean, it's probably happening. And, we could stop this. We could stop supporting Saudi's war there, but we just continue to move forward with supporting it. Saudi Arabia continues their bombing of Yemen. This recent reporting by Jason Didd said 50 people were killed, identified as 30 Houthi and 20 pro-Saudi fighters in central Yemen. A lot of the Houthi fighters are, just identified as being killed either by local sources or Saudi sources, and a lot of them are dying in Saudi airstrikes. I've read reports of scores of Saudi airstrikes over the past several weeks and no reports of civilian casualties. While the fighting in central Yemen for this city of Mareb has been going on for quite some time, so maybe most of the civilians are out of the area, I kind of doubt with the number of airstrikes that Saudi Arabia is carrying out that there's no civilians being killed, and it's just going unreported because this is a war zone with very, very little reporting coming from it when you're carrying out a massive air war. And the country is, heavily sanctioned and blockaded. And so, again, this is, these 50 killed were just in the 24 hours of reporting before Jason wrote this article. But if you've been looking at reporting coming out of Yemen, it's been 100 or so, at least, people every week are reported to be killed, at least in the fighting in central Yemen, with other instability going in around the country. So recently I talked about how Saudi Arabia was manipulating the currency of Yemen by flooding the southern areas of Yemen with new cash that they were printing, and that the Houthis in the north had actually staved off some inflation in their area of the country by not accepting the new cash. But now there's widespread protests going on in southern Yemen. This is the area of the country that is on the U.S. Saudi bad side. It's controlled by the Saudi bad government, split with the Southern Transitional Council, who's a little bit more loyal to the UAE than Saudi Arabia, but nonetheless is on generally the U.S. half of the war. And there's widespread unemployment, fuel shortages, and power outages right now in southern Yemen that has created protests. And so one thing that's really telling is they say that, things in northern Yemen are bad because the Houthis control it. But when we have a natural example of what it looks like, what the country looks like under Saudi-backed control, it actually seems to be worse than the country that's under the full blockade, right? This is very disturbing reporting from Yemen, and very concerning that the conditions in, again, the parts of the country where journalists can somewhat get in, even though I think the Saudis are pretty restrictive on who they allow into the areas that they control. But, ostensibly those ports are open, they're not blockaded and stuff like that. They're still having all these widespread outages, just suggests that, this is a power play here on the half of the Saudis and the Emiratis to, I think, try to sever off all of the resources they can from Yemen at this point. And there's absolutely no concern for the people of Yemen whatsoever. All right, that's what I'll wrap it up for today. Of course, I will have more shows out this week. I'm not sure if I'll continue the Villains of the Afghan War series this week or next week. I got a ton of news, ton of things have been happening that I'm going to try to get through this week, but I will be moving forward with that. I'm really going to try to name like dozens of people, especially in the Villains series, but also, some more heroes too, like some, people who covered this war right all along, Ron Paul, Scott Horn, and others who are really right and important on this whole thing to talk about in the Heroes series. So a lot of great stuff coming up on the show. Of course, we are also releasing bonus content. This past week, I released a review of Netflix's Turning Point 9/11 documentary that I did with Matteo Macchioni, who runs the Neutral Partisan Report, and is absolutely great. So I think we had, the bonus shows are a little bit more fun and relaxed, but I think we had a really informative conversation on 9/11 and the way it was portrayed, especially the war on terror and the torture program in that documentary. That a lot of people have, seen. Netflix did a very good job with the release date of that, capturing it right around the 20th anniversary of 9/11. And so, of course, that's why we did our review. And then, all the information is in the show notes. Please, 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 if you're still listening, take the time to share, like, subscribe to the show and all that stuff. We're trying to get the show out there to new people, but part of that is everybody taking the time to do that. And I appreciate it, and we'll be back with more shows this week.